just wanted to give a small heads up for the first couple minutes. My computer did not record Sean's audio, but I was able to adjust it and fix it for most of the interview. So I will provide his answers. You'll just hear me providing Sean's answers, and then eventually you will hear what Sean did have to say. Apologies for that. It's always a work in progress. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that's hopefully for somebody. There is a change today because I have a somebody. Now, he may not be verified on Twitter. I don't know if that's a sore spot, but I am fortunate to be joined by Sean O'Connell, the managing editor of Cinema Blend. Thank you for being on the show. Sean would ask if I knew anybody on Twitter who could help him out with that. I know the new one is coming. I'm very much looking forward to, and I'm happy this new book is hardcover. You're stepping up in the world, Sean. Sean would go on to say in a more eloquent way that when you are printing a book, that the publisher considers how popular the book may be and how popular the subject matter of the book would be, and that determines whether it's paperback or hardcover. I'm very lucky to be chatting with Sean today about his upcoming book, With Great Power, How Spider-Man Conquered Hollywood During the Golden Age of Comic Book Blockbusters. Now, I got through that. I practiced before we jumped on the call today. One thing I have to... All of your titles are so long! If you are not watching live on Twitch, you're missing out. I usually have a prop for each episode. The prop for today's episode is Sean's first book, which is Release the Snyder Cut, the crazy true story behind the fight that saved Zack Snyder's Justice League. Well, I know you've listed it on your bio, No Way Home. Again, if you're watching, I'm wearing my No Way Home t-shirt. Thank you. I had to order it from the States because up in Canada, we don't get the same fun t-shirts. It's not because it needs to be wool lined. It's just a t-shirt. All right. So I read your bio, as I mentioned before jumping onto the call. You joined Cinema Blend in 2001 and have worked your way up to managing editor. And my first question is, between podcasting, Real Blend, shout out, managing any junket opportunities or interviews, and you have 2 children of your own and the occasional set visit, you're on your second book now. But what I want to know is, I have 2 children. Now they're much younger. They're both under 5. How did you find the time to write a book? Sean would say that I will eventually find this out, that as your kids get older, you wind up having more free time. And in the midst of a pandemic, it gave you an opportunity to work on something like your first novel.
I'm just lucky now that my family has accepted the fact that I'm going to disappear for a couple of hours because I have an idea in my head, and my wife understands me more than anybody, which is I'm so appreciative of, is that if I have an idea for the way that a certain chapter should go, she knows that I'm going to be useless until I can sit down and get it out to a certain extent. And I'll come back around, and then I'll be active and, hanging out with the kids and cooking and doing all that thing. But then around 9 o'clock, I'm like, I'm going to go upstairs and write a little bit more. And it's little by little, it all comes together, but it's finding those moments when you can just creative inspiration hits you and you have to be able to sort of be ready to dive back in and start shaping things, because you never know when it's going to come.
Yes. So you're on book 2. Now, the book officially doesn't come out until November 1st. I may or may not be getting an early copy, so then I can say what I think about the book. But if it's anything like the first one, I'm sure I'm going to enjoy it. Now, obviously, writing significantly about the 21st century is full of the peak of comic book films. I would say if you asked most people, obviously there are those foundational films such as the original Superman film and whatnot. But out of all the canon of superheroes, what was your first exposure to comic books? Like, was it a television series? Was it a film? Or was it the good old paper books?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I know growing up, as a youngest, the earliest I can remember, I was watching the 1960s Spider-Man animated series. I had 1,000 Spider-Man toys, and there was a device called a hippity hop, and it was it had a, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a big ball that you bounced around on, and I
with a stick.
with a stick, but the stick was Spider-Man's head with sticks coming out of his head, and those were the handles,
Mhm.
right? And like legitimately for 2 years, I rode that more than I walked, which was weird. I am not quite sure what that means, but I had that toy from an early age. That led to finding comic books. And around that time, Spider-Man was a recurring character on a show here in the States called The Electric Company. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what that is.
A little bit, yes.
He would have live action segments where he fought different people. And I don't know, I just always loved him as a character. And then so once I found comics, I would collect those on the regular, and that becomes an expensive hobby after a while. But I maintained that all the way through high school. So that was always my exposure.
You answered one of my questions, my other question. So I guess I don't have to ask you when your first exposure to Spider-Man was. Mine was an early morning episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. So not the
Terrific
60s
with,
show that came after. I
yeah,
believe they had the
Iceman and
same voice
Firestar.
actor. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, they might have. They might have.
I think so. Well, and then he had an appearance in obviously Into the Spider-Verse. I've seen you talk about this on Twitter a fair bit since the release of No Way Home. You love the final suit.
Oh,
That
yes,
so,
I do.
but here's my question for you, Sean.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
I think the concept of it is great. I remember seeing you tweet about like, what if this happens? I believe you made the definitive statement on your favorite suit before we had been given the official photo. And I want to know
Yeah.
how that's possible because it was so poorly lit in the snow.
Yeah. But how did I know that it was going to look like that? Because I just felt I had no prior knowledge going into No Way Home. I legitimately did not know how that movie was going to end. I legitimately did not know how he was going to end up in that suit. But to me, because he'd been through so many iterations of the suit, and the suit is so important to fans, that the Homecoming suit got a lot of flack for being infused with Stark AI, essentially, and that doesn't belong to Spider-Man. Like he should be, doing his homemade suit. Even when he got his homemade suit in Homecoming, it was a mixture of like a sweatshirt, and the bad goggles. And I was like, well, that's not it
Well, it was a bit more
necessarily.
Ben Reilly inspired, I think, than anything else.
100%. And I love it. I do love that suit, but it's not a traditional. I made this with a
Lycra and a sewing machine.
sewing machine is what I was going for. I wanted to say toaster. I have no idea why I want to say toaster.
I mean, you can use heat to my wife's quite crafty. You need that for the seams.
Yeah. So then even I love the black and red from the end of Far From Home, but again, it's Stark. It's Stark Tech. He got to build it on the ship, and Happy helped him, and it wasn't quite it. So the reason why I love the design of the last one is partially because it looks so comic accurate. Like it really is. It's as close. Like I thought the Homecoming suit was comic accurate, if not for all the AI that's inside of it. It's the closest to comic accurate, even though you're right, we can't see it great. I wish we had one great shot of it, right? But the fact that he made it in his home where he's now by himself, and he's lost everybody, and it's like he's still going to go out and fight, and he's going to use the little police scanner, and these are all the elements that are core to Spider-Man for me. And I don't begrudge Marvel of how they brought Tom Holland in. They had to factor him into a world where all of these Avengers existed, but it's now like now at the end of those 3 movies, we are where I think he should be. And so that suit to me represents him ending a chapter and starting a chapter, and I kind of love it for that reason.
Yeah, it definitely feels more akin, at least in terms of the adaptations of Spider-Man. The ending of No Way Home is certainly closer to the vibe and tone of the other 5 films at that point. So we've talked a bunch about the other films. So this is kind of a 2-part question. So
Sure.
Of the 3 Spider-Men, which Peter is your favorite? And then okay, go ahead.
Are you going to ask me like which Peter and which Spider-Man?
That is what I was going to ask, yes.
All right. So Garfield,
if they don't separate, that's fine. Like if you're like, they've done, both of these people have done, like this one person did it, this is the version. You don't have to separate if that's not how you feel about it.
No, I totally understand. No, but I do feel differently about them. And again, I'm gonna specify up front that I legitimately love all three of them. But if we're gonna nitpick, I love Andrew's Peter more than the other two, because I felt like he got to do something different with Peter. Toby was a very traditional Lee and Ditko interpretation of Peter.
A 60s version of a nerd.
100%. And Tom is doing a Peter that works really well inside of the MCU, but they tweaked his origins enough that I have not issues, right? But Andrew got to do a different Peter that worked really well in the type of movie that they wanted to tell, especially the first one, especially in Amazing Spider-Man, where he's not quite a nerd. He's a little bit more edgy, he's a little bit more of a punk. And it fit the type of Spider-Man he was going to be. And first off, I think Garfield is probably the best actor of the three. And then when he connects with Emma Stone, it's just unlike any of the pairings in the other, three in the three different franchises. And I think that that's so integral to Peter, is like his heart is always on his sleeve, and he's always crushing on some girl. And I thought that when they had to spin it on his Peter, and Captain Stacy had to say, leave her out of it, it wasn't a drastic ask. It really was like, hey, your life is dangerous and it's going to get more dangerous. Leave her out of it. If you really love her, leave her out of it. And that's a great Peter story. Like, that's a terrific Peter story. And I don't think Tom got a sacrifice like that. I don't think Tom had to really, Far From Home became a lark, a sort of overseas trip that dealt with like Nick Fury and the elementals and all that jazz. I think Andrew got to play Peter in a way that like the other guys didn't get to do. And for that reason, he's my favorite. Favorite Spider-Man? My favorite Spider-Man is Tom. When he's in the suit, whether it's in Civil War, whether he's cracking jokes in Homecoming, whether it's him lifting the rubble, in a homage to the final chapter, and just fighting the Vulture on the edge of the plane, like he's the quippiest legitimate Spider-Man, and I think he looks fantastic. I think that in Marvel's hands, they capture comic accurate, like panel worthy movements. Like I'll go back and watch the Civil War fight where he fights Falcon and Bucky in the airport over and over again, because it's like the first time that we're seeing MCU Spider-Man fight people, and I'm just like, God, the physicality of it is perfect. It's exactly what I want it to be. It's so I love his Spider-Man, and I think he's just outstanding. The swing through the Staten Island ferry where he's webbing up all the different pieces of it and almost gets it.
99%.
Yeah, it's so close, but that's such a magnificent physical representation of what Spider-Man can do.
For sure. That was a great answer. So I obviously I've mentioned the first book because I've read it, listened to the audiobook, and we've talked on Twitter about who I thought would be the perfect audiobook narrator for that. I'm not going to get into that.
What did you say?
We talked about so Josh Keaton, who was the voice in the Spectacular Spider-Man, which of all the Spider-Man media, that's my favorite Spider-Man anything.
Sure.
Which
I see that.
Is not really shocking if you look into who's involved. Greg Weisman, who produced it, was also responsible for Gargoyles, Spectacular Spider-Man, and Young Justice. So he does things with comic book characters and even original characters that are my favorite. So
wait, can I throw out who my legitimate favorite Spider-Man is though?
Sure, absolutely. It's
gonna sound weird. Have I ever told you this? Have we ever had this
I don't
discussion?
believe so. No, I don't think so.
Chris Pine's Spider-Man in Into the Spider-Verse is my favorite. Like his banter with a giant Norman Osborn is gold. It's just gold. It's like the funniest stuff Spider-Man's been able to say. And he has that exasperated, I'm exhausted. Even when he's fighting Prowler and he's just like, are you mad at me? I feel like you're mad at me. Like his delivery is fantastic.
And he sings Christmas carols.
And
And he sings
he
Christmas
does.
carols. Spidey
He does.
Bells is in my wife loves Christmas, and Spidey Bells I said is a mandatory addition to that Apple playlist. The reason I brought up your Snyder Cut book film is we, as you mentioned in the beginning, that I'm sure the ending of that book was constantly changing with what was going on over the last 2 to 3 years, I guess 3+ years now. So what in your approach to With Great Power, did it give you some semblance of not calm? Like, were you calmer going into it knowing that at minimum we knew we were getting No Way Home?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know if the book does touch on the Into the Spider-Verse films. I'm assuming more live action. That's just my assumption. So knowing we were going to get this penultimate Spider-Man Endgame, for pun intended, film,
Sure.
did that make approaching a conclusion of this story easier?
It did, because I had to kind of accept the fact that I was never going to reach closure because Spider-Man movies are going to keep coming, right? And I did figure we were going to build all the way up through to No Way Home. I adjusted when I realized to the full extent of what No Way Home was going to be, because you have to remember I started writing this long before any confirmation of the other two Spider-Men being in it, and so that, as it was happening, similar to when the Snyder Cut got announced that it was coming out, I was like, oh, this is a really strong closure. Now, this is the movie that represents the 3 generation of Spider-Man coming together. It's the thesis of the book, essentially, like putting them together in a movie that then ended up becoming the film that like returned most audiences back from the pandemic, and set records and became Sony's highest grossing film. Like, if my point of the book was that if this is the golden age of Spider-Man, of comic book movies, and Spider-Man's the most popular, No Way Home became the test case that said, like, yeah, he really is. Like, look at all that he's been able to accomplish by dipping into his history. So that was, again, fortuitous in a way that the release the Snyder Cut one was, that movie started coming out. I do touch on Into the Spider-Verse, and I have a whole chapter about the formation of that, and I really wanted to build towards their Oscar win, because, again, an Oscar win for a character like Spider-Man elevates him above some of the other characters in the field. Like, there have been technical wins for Batman and Superman, and but for Spider-Man to win in an animated category for something as groundbreaking as that,
which Disney and Pixar have essentially won everything since that category was created.
Absolutely. And it tickled me to no end to see Avi Arad go up on stage at the Oscars with a Spider-Man, stocking cap on. That's great. That just made me laugh so hard.
If that picture's not in his office, I think he missed that opportunity.
Oh, apparently Lord and Miller say that you can't go anywhere in Avi's home or office where you're not inundated with some type of merchandise, because he has such a toy background.
Absolutely.
So he loads himself up with that stuff. So yes, I did know that there was going to be some form of closure that at least teased out, because I do, and not only do I talk about Into the Spider-Verse and that universe in the book, but I also get into all of the Sony films that are not connected to Spider-Man, and the success of Venom. And I hadn't seen Morbius by the time I had to turn in the book, but I mentioned that it was coming, mentioned Craven, talked about Madam Web, and who knows where else those movies are going to go, and then sort of painted it as maybe we're going to get a point where Sony brings Spider-Man back and inserts him into this universe that they're building. I have interviews in the book with Tom Rothman, who's the president of Sony Pictures, and then Sanford Panich, who's his second in command, who has really taken over the Spider-Verse universe there at Sony. And he swears up and down that there's a plan. When it gets revealed is anyone's guess. And I'm sure that neither of us thought that El Muerto was going to be part of that plan, but it's coming apparently. And
it certainly is. All right. I know I don't have much more of your time. So you have already announced your 3rd book, and you were in the process of writing that. So Unbreakable, Bruce Willis's Enduring Legacy on Film. So I know you're working on that one. I wanted to say thank you.
That's short. That's a short title, right? That's short enough.
It's missing 4 less words. You're just if you could put in the titles of books into Scrabble, if that's not a game, it should be, because I think your books would win. Last question before I let you go. So I read that you play 3 instruments, which I'm incredibly jealous of because I can play nothing. Guitar Hero does not count, and that you're in a garage band. Is your garage band name Spider-Man related?
No, it is not.
You're not like the Webheads or something, the Friendly Hood Neighbors.
No. They would never let me get away with that. That's inserting too much of my personality into.
There's no Spider-Punk jacket.
Well, I won't say that there isn't going to be a Spider-Punk jacket at some point. If there's official merchandise tied to that character when Across the Spider-Verse comes out, I will own it, and I will definitely wear it during a show.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for Sean for spending your time on this little show. I'm really looking forward to the book, and you will be the first to know when I have finished it.
Kyle, I can't thank you enough for having me on, man. Honestly, this was great. I really enjoyed it.
Wanted to say thank you again to Sean for being on the show. That will conclude episode 12. Next week's episode will be a review of Black Adam with another special guest, Stephen Colbert of ScreenRant.com, as well as SnyderMinute.com. You can pre-order Sean's book on, I believe, all international Amazons, and it comes out November 1st. I'll see you next time.